Here's what nobody tells you when you sell your business. The hardest part isn't the deal. It's not the due diligence. It's not the negotiation. It's what's happening inside your head before, during, and after. The self-doubt, the emotional whiplash, the question of who you are when the company is gone. Most sellers aren't ready for it, and it could cost them in a big way. Today's guest, Lauren Johnson, spent years conditioning the minds of professional athletes with the New York Yankees before taking that same playbook into the boardroom. She trained Google executives, FBI agents, and high-powered entrepreneurs to perform under pressure regardless of the circumstances. If you're thinking about selling or you're in the middle of a deal right now, you need to hear this. Let's get into it. Lauren, welcome.
Excited to be here.
I really appreciate you coming on. I know you have a lot going on, and your career is fascinating, but I circled it this morning, right? I said mental performance coaching, right? That's a relatively new business model term. How would you explain that to our audience that may never worked with a mental performance coach or a coach at all? So,
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the best way to describe it is actually to go back to a moment when I was with the Yankees, and I walked into the locker room, and it was we were having a coaches meeting, and one of the coaches came up to me. He was like, "Lauren, mindset is everything." And I just had this moment where I like zoomed out, and I was like, "Is it?" Like, I was like, if mindset is everything, then why can I not throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball down the middle?
right.
Like, why can't I do what those players are doing? And the truth is, mindset is not everything, but it impacts everything. And that's important. And so, what I do, I don't teach CEOs how to better CEO. I don't teach professional basketball players how to shoot better. I teach how to master your internal world with the skills that you already have or have continued to develop.
Well, it's fast. So what are some like a common thread that you see in all these high performers, right? I mean, the Yankees. Now, okay, I'm a Red Sox fan. I'm going on record right now. So
Fair.
very difficult to look at your paraphernalia behind you and not feel like shiver down my spine. So, but anyways, the Yankees, New York City is the fishbowl. I mean, it is probably the most high pressured environment a professional athlete needs to perform in. And you know, being with the Yankees, and I know watching them all the time against the Red Sox, a lot of people just can't do it. So what is some of the common threads you see in these high performers that help shape, your philosophy and how you work with them?
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is when I first got into this field, I had this thought that high performers don't deal with things the same as everybody else, which is true, but they have to deal with the same things as everybody else. They just do it differently, meaning they don't have less fear than any of the rest of us. They don't have less struggle than any of the rest of us. They don't have less adversity than any of the rest of us. They're just able to manage themselves internally better because they've trained their minds to do so. I saw a recent interview with Djokovic, and one of the goats in tennis, and he said, "I would fair to say I have more negative thoughts that come into my mind than you." But he said, "How I'm different than you is I've trained my mind to not sit in those too long." And
Hmm.
so that's the best way to really describe how high performers think. But they still deal with all the same things you and I deal with. And so they've been able to take what's happening in their mind, understand it, and put in a plan for when those things occur, how they're going to manage it. It's no different than drawing up a play in a sport and going, okay, if this happens, this is how we're going to handle it. We draw up those same plays, but for our mental game as well.
Yeah. So I've been working with business owners for almost 25 years now. And people say, what do you do? Right? And I say, I work with them to talk through their concerns. 90% of what I do is really helping them understand things. And so they can relieve that pressure, relieve that stress, help them maximize the value with the buyer down the road So they are, as you say, performing well. So if you look at it from selling a business, we look at, maybe three phases, right? You got before the sale, getting ready for it. People, do they do or do they not prepare for it? Then you have the pressures of selling the business, the due diligence, which is intensely um, just amazing amount of work that needs to be done. I look at it as it's like I said before, an MRI CAT scan on your business. And then the big issue, the big thing is like your identity, you right after the sale. What happens after? How do you prepare for that? So if you look at it, you got a business owner spending years building his business. What kind of things would you help them with in that preparation process, whether it's 3 to 5 years from now or 6 months?
Yeah, I like to go back. Like let's take Michael Phelps, for example. He was really famous for visualizing. And there's three things he used to visualize before any race, and it was how he wanted it to go, how he didn't want it to go, and how it could go.
Mm-hmm.
The reason he did that was not because he wanted his brain to like think of all the bad things, but he wanted to familiarize his brain with it. Because what happens a lot of times is when we're feeling panic or we're feeling fear, it's not because we don't have the capacity to manage it. It's because our brain is unfamiliar with it. So the more you can familiarize your brain with potential adversity that you might hit, a plan for what you're going to do if and when that occurs, and other scenarios that might take place, what you do with your brain is you build competence around how you will handle it if and when it occurs. It does a couple of things. Number one, it creates a connection in your brain between a situation and a behavior you wish to follow. Number two is it suddenly creates a familiarity that wasn't otherwise there, and you don't have to go through it to create familiarity. You can do that through walking through on paper what could happen and how you might manage that if it does. You can do it through visualization, and that familiarity keeps you calm in the face of chaos. It keeps you thinking your prefrontal cortex online, which is your rational brain, instead of your emotional brain. Because as our emotions go up in our brain, your prefrontal cortex turns off, and so that means that we make less better decisions when our emotional brain is taking over. And so one way to manage that is by creating familiarity with adversity. So if this happens, this is how I can manage it. And then your brain goes, there's a chance something could go wrong. And when it does, we're prepared to handle it.
Yeah. So, again, most of our clients are first time, only time they're selling a company, and they really have worked in a silo their whole careers. I mean, it's been these walls, and they've been in control, right? They have
Mhm.
dictated. They may have had a partner, but they basically have dictated how things are going to go their way. So when you start thinking about the sales process, it starts opening up. What do I need to do? So they say, okay, smart business owners, they'll hire their estate trust attorney, their M&A attorney, investment bank like Osage, talk to the wealth manager about what I need, and then tax implications of the transaction. But they never think about, getting ready for those meetings, right? Preparing for that interaction. I mean, the first part of the sale is like we work with them. They're not communicating with the buyer, right? They're just sitting there and they're putting together information for us, and then we get ready, we go to market. But then it comes a time when they are going to meet for the first time with somebody who's interested in what they've developed and grown, and their baby, so to speak, over the years.
Mhm.
So if you're sitting there, you should be in the room. That mental preparedness, that toughness, mental toughness. Preparing them for those initial meetings, because I can tell you, I've been in meetings where literally they walk in and my client's sitting there with their arms like this, and it's like it sends a vibe to the buyer. Whoa, right? It's not welcoming. It's reactive. So if you're like, you're sitting with that person, getting them ready for that initial reaction, initial interaction with that potential buyer or buyer groups, so to speak, what would you try to express to them or get them to really start focusing on?
I would want to know, how do you want to show up in that room? How do you want the other person to experience you?
Hmm.
What is the goal when you leave that room? Because that'll inform how we actually want to show up. Because what ends up happening a lot of times is we, especially athletes in performance, is we work so hard in training, right? They've worked so hard to get to this point, and then they get to this point and they just wing it. And we forget that because we've worked so hard, the more you work at something, the harder it is to let go of it. We know that in sports, in business, you name it. And so, knowing that, we have to prepare for those things and we have to think through what is the goal of this? Because a lot of times we'll allow our emotions to take the wheel, whether or not we're super aware of it. And so, what you're talking about, the arms crossed, that's likely driven by emotions in some way. Like, I'm not certain this person is right, or I'm going to make sure you're right for this. Well, let's think about what the end goal is. When we think about the end goal, we can remove the emotion for a second and go, what is the goal of this meeting? And if the goal of this meeting is to have this person go, oh, absolutely, this is what I want, and this is how much I want it for, then let's reverse engineer how we're going to plan that meeting. How do you want to show up to put ourselves in the best position to achieve that? What questions do you need to ask to make sure that you're ready for that? And so, really, I would dive into the end goal because the end goal would drive our performance plan. Because it's one thing to bring your ego in and go, do you want to be right or do you want to get it right? And sometimes when we don't prepare, our emotions jump in and we can really impact those meetings without meaning to.
Well, that's a good point because it's all emotions. It really is. I mean, from my perspective, it be just. I mean, a deal gets done, like I said in opening. It's just be how you navigate the emotional landscape,
Mhm.
and it's not. There are always surprises. Not just emotion, your own, right? It's your that family businesses. When we work at family businesses, right? It's that collective family, that second family, right? The people that are under your wing who have been with you 10, 20, 30 years. And then how do you prepare to talk to them? I mean, that question always comes up, right? This is like, and a lot of business owners don't want to have that conversation until they know they have a deal. Others feel that, and we're dealing with a client right now that I've never held anything from these people, right? And I can't hold this. I can't. It will kill me. He said, I can't do that. How do you prepare them? Again, it may be similar to what we just talked about. How do you prepare them for that conversation? Because it's a tough call. They,
Yeah. Yeah, it is a tough call. And it brings me back to I had a player come in my office once and he was injured, but he didn't want anybody to know.
Mhm.
And our conversations are confidential. And so I'm sitting here and I'm holding this really important piece of information. And I had to have a similar conversation with him, and where I went, okay, let's talk about why you're not sharing this. Like, what is the fear? It's always rooted in typically a fear.
Mhm.
Avoidance or not is a coping strategy for a fear. So I was like, okay, what is the fear? And he dove in, like, I'm afraid that I'm going to be put on the injured list for another 3 months. And I just got off it. And I'm like, okay, that's a valid fear. And
Right.
so for your client, it might be, I'm going to disappoint them. They're going to be really upset, or they're going to be upset I didn't tell them in time. So there's always a fear rooted there. And then I like to go through the cost because there's always a cost. And so, first, the initial cost that we think about is like, what's the cost of, let's say, for this person in particular that's struggling to hold it in. And the question is, what is the cost of telling them later? Because that's going to
That
address their fear. Okay,
right.
what is the cost of telling them later? And they're gonna have a bunch of reasons. And then what is the cost of telling them now? Because when you can also contrast the two different sides, you can see it a little bit more clearly.
Mm.
And so I often will say, okay, well, what's the cost of moving? What's the cost of not making a move? What's the cost of doing the thing you said you're going to do? What's the cost of not doing the thing you said you're going to do? And so for them, I'd want them to see the big picture. And then I'd want to get down to the fact is it about them or is it about you? Because people that struggle with that, it sometimes is about them without them realizing it and with the best of intentions. But it's because they struggle to hold it in when really it might be better for the people on the other side.
Yeah, it's kind of like they may feel some vulnerability, right? Because now, which is causes anxiety, which causes everything you're talking about in the cost benefit relationship. But it's employees like it is like I look at it as, and I ran a few businesses before I opened up Osages. They look to you for guidance, not just in their business, but also in their personal lives. So it's like they feel like they're going to be orphaned, right? If you're leaving, where's mom? Where's dad? Right? What are we going to do?
Right.
Who's gonna adopt us?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I mean, and owners can take that very to heart, and so that cost benefit, and people are smart. If you're a 70-year-old business owner, and people know that you're not going to be there forever, right? So you think, well, then you may think you're indestructible, right, as a person because you come in every day, do your thing, but they know. You right down to the person that cleans the floors. They're smart. They know what's going on. So I think to your point is, having that conversation with the employees at the appropriate time, right? I think through working with someone like yourself, you can have those conversations is going to be a big lift off your shoulders because you got to run the business. You got to manage your employees specifically through not just running the day to day, but also now you have a transaction there.
Hmm.
And now you're working with a potential buyer, which is a whole unknown to you. And you finally come down and you make a decision, this is the right buyer, the right fit. And now you sign a letter of intent. And as we always say, letter of intent, right? We have agreement to sell the business at this price based on these terms and conditions, right? Your whole life just is right in front of you. It just flashes. And I always say that's when the work really begins. That's when you need to have, us as professionals working with you to really decipher all the information into a business sense or English so you understand it. And then someone like yourself, because there's pressures that come up, during that mental preparation of due diligence, is intense. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, you know, getting them ready at that stage. Because now you kind of say, okay, I'm going to sell the business. My employees are key employees, at least are on board. I've made a decision. I'm feeling kind of comfortable about it. But now all of a sudden you're opening up everything you've ever done, good or
Hmm.
bad. There's somebody else that you think it's right by, but you don't really know how they work. And here you are.
Yeah, it's like I just trying to put myself in their shoes for a second. Like it feels very vulnerable,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Because now you're opening yourself up to another person's opinion and scrutiny and questioning, and that can feel very personal, right? It can feel very, very personal. And so to me, there's a couple things I would prepare somebody for with this is again, I would go through that like, what do we want to have happen? What might happen? Like they know themselves and what they've done in the business better than anyone else. Hey, if you put yourself in the investor's shoes, what red flags would you see here? And let's start looking at those and like, what might they question about these? Because again, you're a smart person. You've built something that is incredible enough that somebody wants to pay you a large sum for. What are the things that stand out to you in this? And as they start considering that they're going to be scrutinized, and as they start considering and being their own biggest critic on the areas they are being scrutinized about, and likely if they were in that person's shoes, spending that kind of money that they would want to know answers to, it begins to be less personal and more strategic. And so I would want to dive into those areas. The other thing I'd want to prepare them for is the pressure of it all.
Right.
And so what we know is pressure doesn't just challenge who you are, it reveals it. And so if you're not trained and ready under pressure, you will default to what you've trained the most. So, what we know is that a lot of business owners have been under a lot of pressure for a very long time, right? They've had to go through the trenches to get to where they are. And once you've gone over that, there can be a point where things get comfortable for a while. I want to make sure they have that part of their brain trained for the arena.
Lauren, this is such an important topic that I would love to have you back to continue the conversation and talk more deeply about other aspects of the mental preparedness, emotional preparedness, mental health aspects of the transaction. Such an important topic. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you can join us for the next episode and conversation with Lauren. And if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to click below to a similar podcast we did that I hope you enjoy. Thank you.